Friends and neighbors, countrymen, lend me your ears. This is WeatherBrains episode number 598, the pre-show. This is the show for July 3rd, 2017. And a little secret just between us, we're actually doing the show on June 29th. So we're going to try, this is Vacation Take 2. This is, for those that don't know, this is the part of the show where we share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and occasionally say outrageous things, and we get our guest all lined up and ready to go. We'll start the show in a matter of mementos here. But so what happened, I was scheduled to be off work last week, and that didn't work out so well. Sometimes in the weather business, best plans just don't work out for taking a week off. I mean, so we had a little early season tropical system that spawned some tornadoes and flooding, which brought me back. So we're going to try again next week to take a few days off. So instead of the WeatherBrains normal production, live production on Monday night, it's a Thursday night special. And I'm always amazed how many people know that we're actually here because people are watching us now. How do they know? I've not tweeted this or told anybody.
They sit every night just hoping it might come on.
They just keep hitting that refresh button, hoping that we just a weird live stream in the middle of the week. So that's the story.
Dream on.
No,
I would like to point out that my forecast of a tropical system on your vacation week was a 100% hit.
You nailed it.
That's always easy. Just I've already predicted the winter storm that's going to come for the December vacation.
Yes.
Oh, and you know, allegedly, we're going to try and do this thing we were going to do in Kansas City at the AMS broadcast thing in January at the annual meeting.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
That will be the ice storm of
the century. But that will be preceded by the worst January severe weather outbreak ever.
Exactly. I just,
and you heard it here first.
And you got that right. So I think we're probably all here. I think.
Well, yeah. Now we got Kim. We are here. Yep, you're right.
Hey, Kim. I think Aubrey said she might stick her head in here in just a little bit, but this is probably going to do it. So this is our 4th of July special. So let me turn the recorders on. We're going to start 7 minutes early. This is a world record.
And Kim, you look
part of it.
So.
Yeah. You guys are writing history with us here.
After 600 shows.
Yeah. This is, what is this, 598? Yeah. 2 away from 600. You'd think we'd figure this out by now. But normally, for those that watch the YouTube here, we have to wait. We air this live on television. And this will be aired on television. In fact, you might be watching this. I don't exactly know when they pick this up, but we air it on Monday nights. And when we're live, we have to wait until 30 minutes after the hour. So we'd have to wait 6 minutes here. But since we're not live, this is all pre-recorded, we can just do this thing. So
let's make sure Kim can hear us.
Oh, Kim, can you hear us? Well, she waved at us.
You're muted, though, Kim.
Well, she's not trying to talk. Say something.
There we go. Yeah. Can we hear you?
Ooh, no, Bill, you nailed it, Bill. You're a genius.
We didn't get to do it.
Kim is an experienced Google Hangouter. I thought she'd be just...
So check your settings, Kim. I think you might. We can't hear you.
Yeah, we can't hear you, Kim, and you can hear us. That little gear thing up there lets you pick your audio source.
Your video's clear as a bell or something.
So I did a conference with Dr. John Scala, an IWT in Pennsylvania, this week, and that was awesome. And for the first time, I felt confident. I've got fiber at the house for the first time. I've got 1,000 megs down, 1,000 megs up. And in theory, in the real world, you get about 800 to 900, and that's just unbelievable. I mean, like you when you upload a video, you press upload and it's done. I mean, you think there's something wrong. But I felt like I commanded that IWT meeting because I knew I had the big pipe, because usually when I'm doing those,
fiber meant something else when you said it.
Do what now?
I thought fiber was something different when you said.
Oh yeah. See,
we're familiar with that kind of fiber too.
Old guys need a lot of fiber. Brian and I totally understand that concept.
Hey, speak for yourself.
Yeah, come on, man. We must have fiber in our diet.
Show title: James needs lots of fiber.
Fiber. But no, I knew that the quality would be really good, and it was
Josh and I,
do what now?
Oh, I was just saying, Josh and I, we had to come into the office here. It's 9:30 Eastern time because we had no confidence in our home internet service.
Yeah. Well, see, I'm the same way. It's like I needed to come to work to do something like this, and for the first time, I felt like I could do that thing from home, and I did it, and it worked out very well. So, it is nice. I mean, goodness, it's just crazy. Brian, uploading these videos we do.
Yes. How long does it take you to do one now?
Less than 2 seconds.
No.
Holy mackerel.
No, you press it. Gosh, you press it and it starts to process. It's that. I mean, it's like it's like a LAN or something.
Holy mackerel!
Insane.
Wow. I'm coming to your house to do videos next time.
I'm going to come to your house to do my videos.
You load them up to Facebook, and I mean, it's insanity.
All
Wow.
right,
we thought we were going to geek out about weather, and instead we're geeking out about tech.
Yeah, you never know what we're going to geek out about here.
On the wrong podcast, Josh.
Yeah,
wait about 3 weeks, and it might be football.
Yeah, that's right.
Football brains.
Hey Kim, say something to us.
Oh no!
Uh-oh.
I can't hear you still.
She says, "Time out, ladies and gentlemen."
I got that.
That was a football move.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
we're losing our record, though. I'm afraid we're going to start on time.
We got to start late.
That's breaking it now. Yeah.
What's cool? Bill called me. Bill, how did you know her audio wasn't working? You're a genius.
Because I know Kim likes to talk, and we would have already heard something out of her.
Boy, I bet she's glad. I bet we're glad she's out of the picture right at the moment.
No.
Didn't hear you say that.
No, we would tell her to her face.
So here's the question: What is that law that's on the wall behind you, Josh? The only thing adorning the wall.
Yeah, that's Tosca behind me. Chemical safety reform.
All right, guys, did this work?
Whoa! There we go.
Ladies and gentlemen.
That's a good eye, Steve, though, that you could tell what that was.
Oh, yeah. I've seen a few of them.
Kim, what'd you do?
I just switched my browser. I just figured that something else might work better when all else fails with internet connections.
We're techies here. So you're in Chrome, Safari, IE. What are you on now that works?
I'm on Firefox. Chrome was
Firefox.
not working.
Wow.
Yeah, I know.
Chrome won't work with Hangouts. Wow. That's
so funny because earlier today I couldn't get Edge, which is Internet Explorer's successor, to work with this, and so I'm on Chrome.
I'm also on Chrome.
What's weird, I've had inconsistencies with Chrome. I'm on Safari. So.
What about you, Brian? You didn't weigh in.
I'm on Safari.
Oh, there you go,
Brian. So you just got to do what works. That's all that matters.
Hoping the AT&T keeps.
That's what's funny. I see all these people fighting about these stinking phones. Android and iPhone. They get all upset and start fighting and hating on each other. It's a stinking phone. Use whatever works for you. It's no big deal.
Agreed.
All right, let's get this thing.
One kind that catches on fire, though. Don't use that kind.
Yeah, don't use that one.
Yeah, you'd be kicked off the airplane. All right, let me turn on recorder track number 1 and track number 2. And here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This is WeatherBrains episode number 598 for July 3rd, 2017. This is the weekly show that's all about weather. Happy Independence Day, and thanks a lot for taking the time to listen this week. We've got kind of a thin crew because of the holiday. In fact, a little secret just between us, we're actually recording the show on June 29th, but you don't know that. For the world, they think this is July 3rd. But no, the deal is I had a vacation schedule for last week. And that didn't work out. We had a tropical storm that happened to spawn some tornadoes and flooding where we are down here in the Deep South. So my Kansas City AMS meeting trip was canceled and had to stay and work. So we're going to try vacation again next week and see if that works. So Brian Peterson, you called it. You called it early that a tropical storm was going to happen.
Absolutely. Whenever you go on vacation, something always catastrophic happens. So it's an easy forecast.
Usually,
Kind of
the
like putting
June-
out warnings for supercells. You know, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. Bing, bing.
Yep.
You got it.
Usually the June week is kind of safe, but sometimes in
this year.
August, not this year. And of course,
Well-
August, that gets into the peak of the hurricane season. That's the next one.
You know, you were just talking about what we had in Alabama. We had so much weather here. I don't even know if they had any damage down there in Louisiana and East Texas.
Yeah, I think we, and again, what we tried to stress all along, don't look at that line. Don't look at that line. I mean, do not look at that red line on that map. You don't get your eye on that. Get your eye over here, and let me tell you what's going to happen. And then I don't think they had much impact in places like Lake Charles and Houston and Shreveport. To my knowledge, that they had really no issues at all, where we wound up in some cases with over a foot of rain and tornadoes. And one came through a very densely populated part of the Birmingham Metro that was an EF1 that could have killed some people. I mean, we were pretty lucky.
Missed a shopping mall by like 500 yards
across the street. Yeah,
across the street.
Yeah.
Across the
it
parking
was.
lot. But it took out a liquor store.
Yeah, it broke Brian's heart the next day that they were out there destroying the booze bottles. They were just smashing them, and the booze was running down the storm drains. So Brian was shedding a tear.
Some sermon examples this coming weekend somewhere.
They had to pay people to break all those bottles. I would have taken the bottles off their hands for nothing.
I would have paid for shipping.
There you go.
Yeah.
Aubrey, you're on med camp.
Not the show title.
Really sad. You know, this tornado hopped right over a Toyota dealership. It was a friend of mine, and they actually had everyone in their storm shelter.
Wow,
advance,
fabulous.
5 minutes in advance of the actual storm hopping over them. So they were lucky. They didn't have any damage, but the buildings on either side were damaged, and they could have had a disaster there.
Brian reminds me of the guy in Animal House, the John Belushi character. Beluto, what was that guy's name?
Yep,
Blutarsky. Yeah.
Yeah, when they were, when they were shutting the fraternity down and taking the booze away, and some guy dropped a booze bottle and he started screaming. Aubrey is here. The lovely Aubrey Urbanowicz. Thank you for taking. It's Thursday night special, but thank you for coming on the show. Good to see you. How are you?
No problem. Very, very, very busy. So that's why
after something, or what's going on there?
a tiny bit. I am basically the only meteorologist at this point.
That's short-staffed. Yeah,
that's very short-staffed, Aubrey.
Yeah, we have a new daybreak meteorologist. Laura's last day is technically tomorrow. We have a new daybreak meteorologist starting Monday. But I am on a evening stretch, and we also have, several years ago, I started 2 segments. One is like a weather questions where people submit questions, and the other one is things going on about the area. So I also, since those are my original pieces, guess who got them back? It's not like it's just been, constant, you're just constantly doing something.
Yeah, and usually for me, this is the time where it starts to slow down.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, I run from the 1st of January, when school starts after the Christmas break, through the school year into the middle of June. It is a very hard stretch, and I'm so looking forward to that first week off, and I lost it. And it was busy last week with the tropical stuff, so I'm about ready for a vacation. I'm about talked out. So
me too. I'm glad it's been quiet this week.
Yeah, no kidding. Kevin Stelly, are you quiet there in Wichita Falls, Texas?
Well, we are tonight. It was an exciting week, though. I got to travel north to Lawton, Oklahoma, and be in the same room with greatness. One of our guests tonight, and Rick Smith, and I got to tell you that Laura Myers and Kim Klokow and Gina Esco are rock stars. All 3 of them. They have the future of our industry in their hands. We just need to find the best way to communicate those messages, to build the bridge to all of us knucklehead broadcasters. Oh, I should maybe say what the event was. Rick had an IWT. For those who don't know, IWT is Integrated Warning Team. And these are happening at Weather Service offices around the country. But it's a chance for the Weather Service folks and the broadcasters and all the emergency management types and things like that to kind of get together, be in the same room for a little while and visit and hear some good talks. Laura, she just has so many pearls of wisdom from her research and Bill Bunting spoke too from SPC. There's a bunch of good stuff on my Twitter feed. I was kind of tweeting out as we went along, but it was really nice to see everybody. We need a super over Kim's head that says "heading for me," and maybe I'll explain what that is later. But Kim, it's my favorite saying now.
I did like your quote from Bill Bunting about all models are wrong, just some are useful.
Yeah, I thought that one was funny too. Yeah,
that one's going to be used again.
We'll have that. Maybe that can be our next WeatherBrains T-shirt.
I'm about to say, yeah, that could be a show title for this show for sure.
There you go. That is it. Yeah, that's it.
So
no, James needs lots of fiber is definitely the title.
Okay, yeah, Kevin, you missed the show title already. So why Lawton instead of Norman or Oklahoma City?
Well, the first one was geared a little bit more toward this part of Rick's CWA. And so the first one we had, I guess it was last fall or something, and we had it here in Wichita Falls. My church actually gave space for us to meet here. And since it's kind of a bifurcated market, the ABC station is in Lawton. And so Austin Bowling is the chief up there because that's where they're located. And so it's kind of a weird market, but we thought we'd do it up there. And that also allowed some different people to come from Rick's area. A couple guys came from Oklahoma City too, which was really nice.
Cool. In fact, I spoke to one that Dr. John Scala was involved with up in Pennsylvania.
Oh, yeah.
Earlier this week. So this has been a big IWT week. But Bill Murray, let's bring in our guest. We're ratchet jawing too much here. Go.
Oh, wait. I'm sorry. But after the Fox show, I've gotten into a fight with Twitter, so I'll tell you about that. How's that for a tease?
Wow. I can't wait.
Yeah, hopefully I can come back and do that.
Wow. Okay.
We'll make it happen. Well, thank you, James. Tonight's guest, WeatherBrain number 1, serves as the legislative director for the National Wildlife Foundation. That organization is a member of Smarter Safer, and we'll be talking about that tonight. But in that role, he helps set strategy and coordinate outreach to members of Congress on key campaign priorities, including clean water and wetlands issues, energy policy, federal appropriations for wildlife conservation, and protection of public lands in Alaska and the Rocky Mountain West. Josh Sachs, welcome to WeatherBrains.
Thanks so much.
Well, we're glad to have you here tonight. Where are you coming to us from, Josh?
From Washington, D.C.
Woohoo! It's a fun place this time of year, I guess.
A hot and sticky place this time of year.
The recess will be coming back here soon, and everybody will be coming back from recess, and all the fun will begin.
We're about to have a recess, but it's going to be very short.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, we're glad to have you here tonight. Thank you for joining us on short notice. We have to recognize that our show tonight is a suggestion of Nick Palladino. Nick, thanks for telling us that, because we were trying to fill this show for Monday night for about 3 months and had about a dozen people turn us down. So we were lucky James moved it to tonight, and we're even more lucky that we have you with us tonight. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. And
second guest WeatherBrain tonight is the Vice President of Taxpayers for Common Sense, which is also a member of Smarter Safer. He joined TCS in 1999, serves as Vice President there, overseeing programs and serving as a leading media and legislative spokesperson. Steve Ellis, welcome to WeatherBrains.
Thanks a lot for having me. Glad to be here.
Well, we had the most perfect, show test hangout this afternoon. I was even late to it. I was late to my own hangout, James Spann. Go figure.
Wow.
But,
wow.
We knew our guests tonight were gonna be great. But tell us real quick what Smarter Safer is, Steve.
Sure. Well, Smarter Safer is one of the things we've liked to do at Taxpayers for Common Sense. We're a budget watchdog organization, and so some people care about wasting money. Some people are less concerned about that. So we like to put together big coalitions, and so we joined this one where you have groups like the National Wildlife Federation, which Josh is with. It's a conservation environmental organization. But you also have budget groups like mine. You also have consumer and housing interests, and you have insurance and reinsurance interests that have all come together on one particular issue. We try to think about that our commonalities are we're trying to do better by taxpayers, do better by people, and do better by the environment. And so we've worked on a lot of disaster issues, and then also on the National Flood Insurance Program, which we're going to talk about more tonight.
Well, it's a very timely message, and we're excited to have you here tonight. Thank you for joining us. And tonight we have as our guest panelist someone who's no stranger to WeatherBrains. She's a regular contributor to the show and a familiar face. She is Kim. I'll let you tell us what you are now. I don't want to get it wrong. What's your current job since you moved back to Oklahoma?
Sure. Well, until recently, for our guests, I was actually in DC. I worked as a policy advisor for social science research implementation at NOAA. And before then, I'd been a congressional fellow for a year. I was a science fellow. And one of the reasons that Bill invited me back here is that one of the issues that I worked on back in the day was on flood insurance. So I can at least help to ask a couple of good questions for our wonderful panelists who are here tonight. And now I'm working in Norman, Oklahoma. I work with the Cooperative Institute and the Severe Storms Lab here. And I'm a research scientist and a societal applications coordinator.
And that is awesome. And it's good to see you again and good to hear from you, Kim. Thank you for joining us on short notice like everyone else.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk flood insurance. It's one of my favorite things.
Always, always a pleasure. So I'm going to start with an easy question, and I'll throw it to one of the guys here. What is the National Flood Insurance Program? Who wants to take that one?
I'll go ahead and start, and Josh will probably trample on me at some point. But so the National Flood Insurance Program was started in 1968 because there was a perceived, by Congress, a perceived lack of affordable flood insurance coverage. And so, but what's really telling is at the time, the advisory council that recommended this, that reported out in 1966, said, and I'm paraphrasing, but that to not price it appropriately would invite waste of great magnitude. And that's kind of what we've seen. We've subsidized flood insurance for a significant amount of time. And this is a federal program where we provide flood insurance. There are some private companies that help write it, but they are not actually bearing any of the risk. It's all borne by the taxpayers. And so now you have a program that takes in, different years are different, but about $3.1 billion in revenue, but is $25 billion in debt to taxpayers. And so it's something that, as a budget watchdog, we really want to see reform.
So how did it get $25 billion in the hole? Just by shortfalls every year, or has it been, the major hurricanes of 04 and 05? Was it just, or is it just more 100-year floods? What is this, dude?
It was largely, Katrina and Rita and Wilma in 2005, those storms were huge. You're talking about $18 billion, $17 to $18 billion in the hole. And then you add into it Sandy, and that's like another $7 billion. But what I would flag is that last year, where you had some significant flooding events, like in Baton Rouge, you had in South Carolina, but you really only had one major hurricane, Matthew. That was the third or fourth largest loss year for the NFIP. And they still had to borrow $1.6 billion from the Treasury. So this is a program that's got real challenges going forward and issues there. And so while for many years until 2005, it kind of went from a little surplus to a little deficit to a little surplus, it was not able to withstand some of these, not even black swan events, but really dark swan events.
So Josh, there's an authorization coming up again. Explain that process and what's on the Hill right now to make that happen.
So the way many programs work in Congress, and the flood insurance program is one of them, is we don't create them permanently. We authorize them for set periods of time. At least in my lifetime, the flood insurance program has sort of run in 5-year increments. And the end of September 2017, we will hit that deadline, and we will need to reauthorize the program. And let me explain. That's really what's important about that is it is a requirement if you have a federally backed mortgage and you are in a special flood hazard area that you have flood insurance. If the program were to lapse at the end of September and we don't do anything about it, or I should say Congress does nothing about it, home sales in the United States would be blocked because people can't get their mortgages because they wouldn't have be able to certify that they have flood insurance. So that's a key driver. What's going to happen here in Congress is we have a bill that has been reported by the House Financial Services Committee. That's the committee that gets to write the bill. We expect that bill to go to the floor of the House of Representatives sometime middle July. The Senate is sort of moving at a slightly slower pace. We may see a few extensions, but the goal is that both chambers pass a bill before September and we can keep this program running for another 5 years.
So people that had insurance already would be okay until their renewal. Is that right?
That's correct.
But if you were writing new insurance, it would be impossible to get it.
Correct. And that's really one of the major pushes why Congress has to act and at least do something.
And Bill, just so you know, that between the last reauthorization and the one that happened in the one before and the one that happened in 2012, there were 17 extensions and 4 lapses of the program, which is very disruptive. And so we all sort of recognize we should be moving forward and having a responsible reauthorization of the program.
So at this point, obviously we have a huge infrastructure that is in harm's way and is part of the problem. So how do we address that? How do we stop the growing risk and put the program on a better situation without causing disruption to people who can't afford it? And I'll let anybody weigh in on that.
Well, I think there are a couple aspects. First off, the way to get the program on sound footing, the way to do what you just said, is to make sure that the rates are risk-based. The rates should be actuarial. The rates should let people know the risk that they face when they live where they live. They should encourage people to take steps to reduce their risk through mitigation and other things. That's the first step. When it comes to helping people with the affordability, it's my belief that the federal government has a responsibility to keep people safe. That goes far beyond flood insurance, and we need to do a lot to make sure that people who live in coastal and riverine areas can continue to deal with more frequent storms, more severe storms, sea level rise, and other potential perils.
So,
And I would just add into this is that the fundamental responsibility of government, like if you go back to just all governments, is to protect their citizenry. And yet you have this federal program that actually subsidizes and encourages people to build and to remain in harm's way. And that is a fundamental failure of government. So some of it is about, okay, we have the built environment. We are in this situation. People bought their homes. People are there. We have to deal with that, and we have to deal with that in a responsible way, not just to them, but also to all the other taxpayers who are ended up footing the bill and that have this $25 billion IOU. And then secondly, and this is where our government kind of messes things up, is that you have flood insurance, which is in the jurisdiction of certain committees. You have our disaster and development policies that are in the jurisdiction of other committees. How do you make sure that they actually interface properly, and that our disaster policies of where we pump billions of dollars? So I just talked about how the NFIP is $25 billion in debt. Well, Superstorm Sandy, we wrote a check for $50 billion plus an increased $10 billion in borrowing authority for the flood insurance program. What do we do to make sure that every dollar we spend on disaster response predisposes to the next disaster and makes us less vulnerable? And so those are some of the issues that we have to tackle together.
I would like to kind of dovetail off what both of you just said, because early on you had a point about affordability, and I tell a brief story to set it up. I remember this may have been 20 years ago or more. I remember seeing on the 2020 news program on ABC, John Stossel was doing a report on flood insurance. And I've always remembered this one scene. He was doing a stand-up. He was walking along the beach in front of these very, very large homes. And he said as part of his stand-up that he even owned one of these homes, I guess somewhere near where he was. But the point he was making was, here was this money for people who could clearly afford these types of homes to not only buy flood insurance, but then he thanked the government sort of, with a little tongue in cheek, for saying, thank you for allowing us to rebuild them as well. And what I think I'm hearing is maybe this is the same problem that you're talking about, but it was 20 years ago. So why has it been so long since those policies maybe haven't changed, or maybe they have, I don't know. And what systems are in place to prevent abuse of the system? Kind of a long, wordy question, but I hope it makes sense.
Well, let's start with a short answer to your question, which is it is very politically unpopular to charge your constituents more for anything. And I think that's part of the problem, is the political will of Congress to move rates up is hard to find.
It is. And is there some need risk-based consideration in qualifying now, or is it just flat across the board?
There isn't, and that's one of the things that we've pushed for. You know, Taxpayers for Common Sense, National Wildlife Federation, our coalition, is sort of means-tested assistance. That right now there are a lot of people, because their house was built a long time ago, are getting a subsidy. They don't even know exactly what their rate would be absent that subsidy, and we feel that's a big problem because we're not communicating risk. Even if we give you a subsidy, if we tell you that your rate other than the subsidy would have been several $1,000s, all of a sudden you do start understanding the level of risk and that you may do things to mitigate. The federal government denies people that risk communication factor. And then secondly, that as we go forward, there are people that, but for some federal assistance, that are living, you know, maybe at 80% or less of the area median income, that choosing between flood insurance and other things might mean that they forego medication or they forego food or something like that, and their housing. So that's where we have housing advocates as part of our coalition, because they want to make sure that it's affordable for the people who need it to be affordable. But for the people like John Stossel and then the people whose beach houses there, clearly they can afford it and they may not like to pay it. But we should be moving towards real risk-based rates for those people, and we should be moving more of those people out into the private market.
Well, that's very interesting, because it sounds like there was that problem 20 whatever years ago when he did that report, but that it's still there today. And so does that mean that there's no hope to change it?
I've been doing this job for 17 years, and so you have to be an optimist if you're a budget watchdog, because I hate to say it, I lose a lot more than I win. But Josh's organization, I think, really did some of the seminal work on this in the late 90s. They did a report on called Higher Ground, and it documented where Houston that had gotten like payments that were equal to 18 times. There have been movements in this area, for instance, in the last reauthorization back in 2012, where they actually did start saying severe repetitive loss properties. Properties where you've had several losses, you're going to have to get to risk-based rates. So they're trying to deal with that. I think it's still an issue. I think it's something that, and Josh mentioned the House bill. The House bill actually says that if there's a property built 4 years from now in the 100-year floodplain, the special flood hazard area, you're going to have to get private flood insurance. If there's a property 4 years from now that is got that's worth $1 million, not just the land, but the property's worth $1 million, you're going to have to go find flood insurance in the private marketplace. And so I think these are important reforms that are incremental, but I think are moving us in the right direction.
So that means you'd have 4 years to either sell the property or be prepared to pay the higher insurance. Is that basically what it says?
Well, or higher. It may not be higher. I mean, that's our whole thing is like we want to see the development of a private marketplace. The private marketplace can offer products that the NFIP can't. Right now, the maximum you can insure your property in the NFIP is $250,000 plus $100,000 for contents. Certain properties are worth more than that. You can't insure a basement. You can't insure a separate garage or other structure. That this may be something that's interesting to you. So what we've seen is this burgeoning development, and I don't want to overstate the private marketplace for flood, but you're seeing in Florida, there are about 20 companies who are writing first dollar. So flood insurance right now, it's small, but they're writing in all risk profiles. And so we want to facilitate that development because, at least from a budget watchdog perspective, we want to see more of the risk move off of the taxpayer's back and onto the private sector.
So why did private industry or private insurance get out of it in the first place?
Well, and the bottom line is if you think about it, I mean, I've got gray hair. I'm an old man. NFIP was started in '68 before I was born. So technology has changed dramatically. I mean, I just saw today that today is the 10-year anniversary of the iPhone. I mean, I have an iPhone. My iPhone today has probably more computing power than a whole room full of computers did in 1968. So what's happened is that the marketplace has developed in the fact that there is greater risk modeling. Insurers and reinsurers write flood insurance all over the world, so there's an interest in this marketplace. And then lastly, part of the thing that the coalition that Josh and I are in, they're insurers and reinsurers, and they're saying, we want to write flood insurance. So whereas Congress decided that there was a lack of flood insurance in the marketplace, now the insurers are saying, we want to run in and we want to write this.
Hey guys, I think you guys have touched on a lot of really amazing issues, and there's so much you can say about so many of the things you started to touch on. Because of our audience being predominantly physical scientists who are probably really interested to know a little bit of the nitty-gritty details about how all of this works, I'm wondering if you can explain flood mapping. How is it, since you've mentioned actuarial risk, I know this is one of the issues with the program. Can you explain a little bit of the history of what the flood maps are that we have today, and what the future looks like for what we might have, and what might be considered in the legislation to move us ahead in just ascertaining what flood risk actually looks like for some of these places?
Sure. So for starters, the National Flood Insurance Program maps the 100-year floodplain. So we call that the special flood hazard area, but anyone who has a 1% chance of annual flooding, we map that. When it comes to then figuring out your risk and your rate, it's pretty basic when it comes to what FEMA does. It's basically how far are you away from the water, how high are you above the water, what is your flood elevation, and from that they use a formula, and rather than calculating risk on the property by property basis, they simply say everyone sort of in this band has a similar set of risk and pays the same. Now we know from looking at structures, there can be two structures side by side, one sort of higher than the next, and they're paying the same exact rate. So it is very sort of basic and rudimentary what they're doing. What can be happening is we are seeing in places across the country, particularly states like North Carolina, where they're using LiDAR technology for flyovers. They're using things like Google trucks to drive around and measure base flood elevation of properties. FEMA is still using that to do fairly basic risk analysis, but the private companies that Steve spoke about are using complex risk models and taking that data into account, as well as forecasting sea level rise, storm intensity, storm likelihood, putting all that together. So that's sort of where we are and where we could be.
And what keeps FEMA from doing some of this, using more LiDAR-based technologies and the risk maps that they use, or even are they allowed to consider climate change in their estimates of risk?
So there are a couple factors here. First, there's nothing that prohibits FEMA from doing this, other than the fact that they need a lot more money to do it. And we should note President Trump's budget zeroes out the money for this. We need significant investment at a time when Congress is drawing down, or at least it's being proposed that they draw down the money. Beyond that, I think there are some technical glitches in the law, and we're working to fix those. We saw some of that in the House bill we mentioned earlier. We've seen better proposals in the Senate bill. So it's a matter of fixing some technical things in law and then providing the resources to get it done.
So Kim, you were involved in a congressional office when you were looking at this, and this was a concern of your constituents. We've touched on affordability, and we've touched on the situations that might occur if insurance becomes unaffordable. What other concerns did your constituents have, and did your boss have when it came to looking at this, several years ago?
Sure. Well, one of the issues that our constituents were really interested in was this faithful risk estimation. We had a lot of people who came to us who the flood maps do change, and some of that is because of improvements in technology. And we had a lot of folks who would be convinced that they were not meaningfully actually in a floodplain, or they'd be surprised by this. And they just wanted to know that the technology that was behind that estimate was faithful. And there is a process where homeowners can argue, or they can dispute if they have been rezoned, and they can get an engineering certificate that certifies that they are above the base flood elevation level, but that's costly, probably about $1,500 investment. And that's sunk money if you don't win. If you do, then we had a reimbursement mechanism in the last bill, but that takes again out of the flood insurance fund, which is not necessarily always solvent. So it's a challenge to think about how we actually pay for all of this and how we do this for our constituents. They were also very interested in affordability. So that's something I'd love to hear a little bit more from the panelists about, because that's sort of where the last legislation left off, was thinking about what are the mechanisms for affordability, who can afford to actually pay actuarial risk rates. As we know, there are the folks in the world who are the second home on a luxurious lakefront, and then there are people who live in floodplains because that's the land that's the cheapest, and that's where you have your lowest income folks living. So that was something that we were very concerned about. If flood insurance rates suddenly skyrocketed for those people, it would be a fast track to foreclosure, especially with the mechanism for forced place flood insurance that was in place, and it remains in place. So I'm interested to learn from you all what the developments have been, the thinking on affordability, and what kinds of things. I saw a policy brief that the Smarter Safer Coalition put forward where you mentioned a couple of ideas about affordability for low-income residents. I'd love to hear your description of that a little bit more.
Sure. Well, thanks, Kim. I mean, there is no doubt, and there are plenty of places around the country where people have developed in high-risk areas, particularly riverine areas, because that was the only place they were allowed to build. Whether they were minorities or whether they were just impoverished, and that's where development occurred. And these people are in these in this harm's way. Our first sort of thing is that subsidizing somebody to remain in harm's way isn't really helping them out. We should be helping them out and helping them out of the floodplain. And so we should be, and there are difficulties in certain places. I remember from some of the disasters in North Carolina, Princeville, historically Black community, they lived there because that was the only place where they could live. They did not want to leave because the ties that the historical ties the community had there, and that's something that's a bigger challenge. But in a lot of other places, you can deal with these issues and either do through buyouts and say, okay, we're going to pay you the pre-disaster value. We did that in places in like Valmeyer, Illinois. We did that in places in like Arnold, Missouri, after the flood of '93. And so you have certain things like that. But then you also have where you're going to have to deal with affordability issues. There are people that we're either not going to be able to buy out because money is not limitless. As a budget guy, I understand that. But then also is that you want to help them just mitigate their risk. And our biggest thing is we should be reducing people's rate by reducing their risk. So we should be doing things that invest in mitigation, particularly, and I'll let Josh step in on this really quickly, but on community-wide mitigation rather than just property-by-property mitigation. But we have talked about things that are even property mitigation, like FEMA working with the Federal Housing Administration on low-interest or no-interest loans that then would basically take their subsidized premium and kind of work it out over a pay pattern that essentially would pay off the loan by reducing their subsidy over that time, where at the end they're actually paying full risk premium, but it's a much lower risk, and things along those lines. We're just going to have to be creative because we've got, and this is a budget guy talking, but we've got a $20 trillion federal debt, and this Congress, I can tell you, is not an appetite for increasing subsidies, and so we're going to have to be creative about how we approach some of these issues. But I think everybody recognizes, from Chairman Conservative Texas Republican, who's the chairman of the Financial Services Committee, to Maxine Waters, who's the more liberal Democrat ranking member, that understands we got to deal with these issues.
And I think at National Wildlife Federation, we think we have that idea of the unique approach, that sort of way to solve at least some of these problems. And that's that we know that some of the best flood protection money can buy is nature itself. When we can protect floodplains and leave them in their natural state, we know they reduce flooding, or they give water a place to go or place to sink into the ground. So whenever we can protect the nature that's there, or restore wetlands in the Gulf Coast, when we can build natural berms, when we can have settling basins, we do a lot to protect people, to reduce their risk of flooding. We also get a lot of other benefits for communities. We get pollution reduction, we get green space, we get areas where members of National Wildlife Federation like to go hunt and fish and see birds. Sort of a win-win.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that you guys touched on a little bit with the mitigation, I saw something really interesting in your policy brief where you described wanting an approach where groups of individuals, not just on an individual by individual basis, but groups of individuals might be considered together, and maybe putting some of the onus of this planning on communities. And I was interested in learning a little bit more about what the Smarter Safer Coalition had in mind for that. It seems like a bit of a change from previous focus of the program, which had been on working through individual incentive mechanisms or the community rating system. So if you guys could talk a little bit about what does exist now for communities to incentivize them to try to mitigate, maybe what are some of the pitfalls of that, and what is this maybe group of individuals approach?
Well, before we even explain the approach, it should say, for a long time, sort of people have gone it alone when it comes to protecting their home from flooding. That means we get a lot of structures on stilts. We get people latching their roofs down and elevating their hot water heaters. That's great. But when communities can band together and invest sort of community-wide, we can do structural or nature-based things that will benefit the entire community. So Smarter Safer wants there to be as much money as possible for federal grant programs that allow communities to engage on this level. You mentioned the community rating system, which is a point system where if communities engage in a series of tactics that will reduce flooding for the whole community, everyone's flood insurance rates are reduced accordingly for the entire community. Smarter Safer also believes that we should do more to allow communities to tap various grants, or in the case of something called an ICC policy, a policy that people can get to help them improve their structures to build up to new code. We think communities should be able to aggregate that money. They currently are allowed to, but they don't do it enough, and use that community-wide to do some of the approaches I described earlier.
And what Josh says when he uses ICC is incremental cost of compliance. It's an acronym for this. But I also think that what's
acronyms in DC. Sorry.
Yeah.
We have them in weather too. Don't worry about it. We love acronyms. Love.
So, but the other thing is I think it's about challenging communities to be creative and do it and how they approach certain things. So, like, individual buyouts are nice and fine, but you're really going to get your bang for the buck if you can buy out a street block, you can buy out a subdivision. So trying to like create systems where it helps that, and then also removing incentives to game the system. I mean, I was in Fargo, North Dakota, and lovely place to visit in December, but I was there. And anyway, you saw what I would call prairie dog towns, where all the houses are like elevated on bumps, because that moved them out of the 100-year floodplain by elevation. But in reality, all their streets would be flooded, all their electrics would be flooded, all the utilities. And it kind of gets to some of the other issues of what we've argued as a coalition is an issue, is that our disaster policy and our flood insurance policy, they work tandem. And so you incentivize development in certain areas by providing cheap flood insurance, and then you have all the other infrastructure that goes in. And this is what I think people don't realize, is that all that disaster spending goes to rebuilding roads and water supply and wastewater and electricity, and not these individual homes. But they're all at risk because all we've done is move them up a few feet that makes them not have to buy flood insurance.
And something you guys have mentioned a little bit, but I think is worth talking about a little bit more for our audience. They can sort of be in the know on some of this lingo. You've mentioned the difference between structural and non-structural mitigation techniques a little bit. I'm not sure that those were defined and explained completely, but non-structural techniques are maybe a little bit newer, especially from a community-based perspective, especially some of the nature-based techniques you've discussed. It's worth pointing out that when we began the flood insurance program, the focus was really on building dams. And it does what you talk about then, you're safe to a point, and then past that, you've exposed more people to potentially catastrophic losses, and you're hiding the risk from a lot of people. There could be a lot of people who are protected by dams and levees who don't really know how vulnerable they could be if we have more of these really large rainfall events. For example, something we saw in California just a couple months ago, a lot of rainfall, and an old dam levee system that started to give way, and a lot of people who woke up to the fact that they lived downstream of that maybe weren't aware of that. Could you perhaps speak a little bit to the mindset change that's gone on in thinking about other ways of mitigating the risk of flooding and maybe not incentivizing people to move into those hazard-prone areas?
Sure. Well, we've seen, of course, it makes sense to people. You build a big wall that'll keep the water out, and that has sort of been the preferred method in the past. But we've learned that these things cause as many problems as they create. We build bulkheads. They create wave action that crosses the river and hurts the other side of the river. We build levees. They crack. I think nowadays people are understanding that a mix of what we call green and gray infrastructure, combining natural features and hardened features, is sort of the best way to go, because you allow the water places to settle, you allow room for storm surge to dissipate. So a great example is, I don't know if you have many listeners in the Gulf Coast, I imagine you do. So in Louisiana, they're doing something called the Master Plan, which is a series of wetland restorations, levees, and other tactics that are designed to basically protect the entire coast of Louisiana against storm surge and flooding. And that is a good example of the type of approach I'm talking about.
So I would just add to that in the fact that, if you talk to a floodplain manager, they'll tell you there are two types of levees: those that have failed and those that will fail. And so you have this residual risk. And it was one of the things that I was most sad that got stripped out of the bill in 2012, where they extended the mandatory purchase requirement to properties in this residual risk area. So you lived in the 50-year floodplain, we 100-year level of protection for you, and buy flood insurance, because under government's eyes, you're not in the 100-year floodplain anymore. In Mother Nature's eyes, when that levee is destroyed, you're still in the 50-year floodplain and you're still going to get flattened. And so what has happened in this sort of weird tyranny of this mandatory purchase requirement is that it's dumbed down our nation's flood infrastructure, where there are a lot of communities that they just want to get to a 100-year level of protection because it means they don't have to buy flood insurance. And yet they need flood insurance. And so what you've seen in certain places, and this is FEMA's data, that after the flooding, which is a rainfall event, not a hurricane, but a rainfall event in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, they said the average homeowner who had flood insurance got $86,500 in flood insurance payments. The average homeowner who didn't got $9,100. Well, you're not going to rebuild your home for $9,100. And so I think that's something that you have to deal with. And then the other thing is, and I'm not going to get too far afield, but I mean, the dam you talked about in California was Lake Oroville State Dam. There's a lot of issues there that are even beyond that, which to me are also really a big deal, because I'm a person who cares about subsidies. The water supply dam for people in LA who aren't anywhere near the risk of that dam failing and flooding the people. So you really have the benefits were totally dispersed away from the people who are the most impacted by the dam.
And I would sort of follow up on what Steve is saying is, we talk to a lot of communities. We talk to people who are seeing new flood maps and now learning they're in a flood zone, or we talk to people who have recently flooded, and we hear the same thing every time. I've never flooded before. Or how can I be in a floodplain now? I wasn't years ago. It's very hard for people to understand that floodplains are not static. That sea level rise is happening, that climate change is happening, that alterations of hydrology or wing dike
parking lots are happening.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we struggle so much when we try to reform the flood program, because that basic understanding of flooding and the fact that almost everyone is at risk in one way or another, it just doesn't take.
Yeah, it's striking for us as a community trying to communicate flood risk in general. It's very, very difficult, and both in real time to describe how threats are evolving and to get people from driving into floodwaters, but also in a climatological sense, like you're describing. When I was in the office, that was one of the things we heard all the time was this, oh, floods don't happen here. And it reminded me of my research with tornadoes and populations of survivors from tornadoes who just said, well, I just never thought it would hit me. And there's theories of sort of cognitive biases that work against us. Evolutionarily, we just don't expect the very rare event to happen to us. And it's very difficult to understand, especially if you've not seen it. And you don't, I think there's really a blindness to the three-dimensional problem with flooding, and that people might think that they're perhaps even in relatively high ground. They don't understand that water can run over that ground, and the ground under them can move. And there are a lot of really interesting risk communication challenges in here that I know having actuarial risk rates might help, but there might also be a real need to think more creatively about how we present this risk to people. I just don't think there's been much of a push.
Well, so from our perspective, that's one of the reasons why we think that actually doing things to promote a private flood insurance market will actually help. I mean, right now, there's 5.1 million national flood insurance policies in the country. There are, last census, 130 million housing units. Even if you sub out rental units and some other stuff, you're still talking about basically a 5% percentage rate impact in the country. As we know, there are far more people who are impacted, but we feel like the more that private flood develops and that there are more companies that are writing this, it's going to become where your insurance agent or your company just says, hey, do you want flood insurance on this? It's only this amount of money. Okay, sure. And so the more that you regularize that sort of activity, the more we hope people will be covered. Because I go back to what I talked about in Baton Rouge. I mean, there are a lot of people who only got $9,100 in disaster assistance that really wish they had flood insurance because they had tens of thousands of dollars of damage and there was no way to help them.
If the insurance lady on TV was selling flood with everything else, we'd have more uptake.
Flow is what Josh was saying at the beginning of that. Flow, yes.
Flow. Yeah, so what proportion of people who are in even 100-year floodplains actually have flood insurance that's supposedly required for everyone who has a mortgage?
No, nobody knows the exact data, but it is clear that there is not all the uptake that should be, and they've increased penalties on lenders for not actually, but we're talking thousands of dollars. I don't mean like tens of thousands of dollars. I mean the thousands of dollars on the lenders for not insuring that. And then not only that, what happens is a lot of times the home is sold or the person's had it and the mortgage is sold and they don't keep it going. And then really in the end, it's less of a burden on the taxpayer, you could argue, but I would rather see these people actually made whole and deal with those issues, because the only time when the federal government actually went and made a lot of people whole was Katrina. That's the only time. And I don't think that's responsible to taxpayers to do that. And so it's more about trying to incentivize people to get flood insurance. And then it's also about developing this private market so that a lot more people can get flood insurance. I mean, the rest of the world has private flood insurance. It's the United States that's the outlier.
So in New Orleans, after Katrina, and what you just mentioned, Steve, were steps taken in the process to make sure that mitigation was part of the rebuilding process?
Well, in a lot of ways, Katrina is an outlier, and a tragic outlier. But it's also a place where I feel like the federal government deserves a lot of opprobrium as well, and the fact that the 17th Street, the London Avenue, and the Industrial Canal failures on the levees there was an engineering failure by the Army Corps of Engineers. And a lot of people got flooded in those areas. Now, that said, I also feel like it's a federal problem in the fact that, and you go back, and I literally have read this, like in the transcripts going back decades before, when a young junior congressman, Bob Livingston, who later became chairman of the Appropriations Committee from Louisiana and almost became speaker, talked about, why are we building levees where people aren't instead of where people are? And some of it is one colleague said, it's the amoral, not immoral, but the amoral calculus of the Corps, where essentially you're going to get a better cost-benefit analysis of building a levee to develop virgin or new land, rather than building like an extra freeboard where people are. Like that last foot of freeboard is not going to benefit you nearly as much in a cost economic benefit because of how often it's used than building in a new area. Anyway, I don't want to get too far into that. I can get really in the weeds in the Corps, but bottom line is that we've got, New Orleans is going to be a challenge. I mean, it is an area that is vulnerable. They've done some additional flood damage reduction. We're not talking about, aside from what Josh, and I'll turn over to him, is talking about, like with coastal wetland mitigation. Those are going to be the major areas where you can invest. But as far as like New Orleans itself, it's very limited as far as what you can actually do to reduce flooding risk within the city itself, except for stuff that happens outside of it. Josh?
Well, I would say New Orleans has taken some steps. They've built the ring levee around the city. If you travel to suburbs and other places, sort of there are more and more homes on stilts than there were before Katrina. I mentioned the master plan before. I think they are
close, Mr. Go.
True. They're making some steps. Is it perfect? No. Can they do more? Of course.
So was it market driven or code driven?
Market driven for the most cases.
Okay. So this in effect becomes sort of the federal government sort of paying restitution for their mistake with MRGO.
Yeah. Now the flood program does set minimum standards for building, but they are minimum. And we could do much better than those.
So how important are
and the state of Louisiana could do much better in their building standards, and that's one of the things on our disaster sort of approach is saying, okay, we don't have to tell you how to build as a federal government. We don't have a national building standard, but we should be able to say, if you don't have a responsible building standard, you're not going to get the full amount of disaster assistance. We're going to shortchange you, or we're going to have a sliding scale. And that's something that both Josh's group and my group and others in Smarter Safer have totally embraced.
So I should start, ringing bells here. What are the things that are coming in the current package of bills that you guys think are important? Kim, you sound in anywhere that you have an opinion? What's important? What needs to be done further? I'm sure this is not something you take one bite at the apple on. It's probably going to take 2 or 3 bites of the apple to fix the program. So start weighing in on some things that are part of the bill or should be parts of the bills that come out of the House.
So from my perspective, we've talked a lot about this today. Mitigation is the most important thing. It's the way we're going to keep rates affordable. It's the way we're going to protect people. And I would say the bills have made some steps, but they have not done enough to invest in mitigation across the country. I suggest people call their member of Congress and say any flood bill needs to do more to make sure we get help. And that means real dollars to help protect, to build levees, to restore wetlands, to do whatever needs to be done to reduce flood risk.
Okay, Steve, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that you're absolutely right. What we learned is that, and Kim can address this too as well if she was there. In 2012, we all celebrated, but it was probably too far, too fast, and we had whiplash in 2014, where a lot of the reforms were repealed. But in this bill, some of the things that I think are really important that are there is some of the continued movement towards risk-based rates. But then also there's some provisions in the House bill where it's saying, okay, if in 4 years' time you want to build new construction in the special flood hazard area, in the 100-year floodplain, the place where there's a 1% chance every single year that you're going to flood, you got to get fiber flood insurance. You don't get to have NFIP. And if your property is worth $1 million in improvements, so not just the land, but the improvements, that there isn't private flood insurance available before you get it. I think those are really important things. And then lastly, the mapping and what we're doing on mapping, I think is really critically important as well.
So you're telling a developer then if you're going to build in a dangerous position, in effect in 4 years, that's not going to be possible under the NFIP. That sounds like a responsible edict to developers who make short-term gains off of this affordability of insurance.
You can still build there. You just can't get your insurance from the flood insurance program. You must go to the private market. And we talked about market signals. We know they're going to send the right signals. We know they're going to charge the right rates.
And that's just going to be a clever way to like say they're going to build better, they're going to build safer, they're going to build smarter.
That's a good point. Steve, Kim, anything you want to add to that?
I haven't seen the recent legislation, but I'm interested in knowing from you guys what mechanisms, if any, have come from the House on trying to address the perhaps mitigation assistance for lower income folks, or putting a stay on rate increases for lower income people.
So there are a few things that House bill does for affordability. Probably the most important is it allows states to, either on their own or through consortiums with other states, offset the cost for people who need affordability help. The states would get to decide how much that is, and the states would need to generate the revenue by increasing premiums for other people. But that is a mechanism that would allow states to engage and help people. Steve can tell you about others, I'm sure.
But that also allows them to band together in a consortium. So it's not just an individual state. It could be several states. It could be all 50 states. We think that affordability is a major issue that got some consideration in the House, but didn't get all of the consideration it deserved. And so we think that in the Senate, there's going to be a lot more looking at that, at least we hope. And our whole thing has been that it should all be means tested. It should be, even in the House, it didn't necessarily say it had to be means tested, but it should be means tested to provide assistance to people who actually need it. And our housing advocates that are part of our coalition are saying, well, yeah, we want to make sure that it goes to people who are choosing between, do I pay for flood insurance, or do I pay for groceries, or do I pay for medication? And that type of level, rather than, oh, it kind of sucks to have to like pay a little bit more money for flood insurance. And so that's kind of where we're trying to approach it. And so we say 80% of area median income. There are others. Senator Menendez's bill, we think, is kind of crazy in the fact that it just basically says that if you pay more than 30% of your income for housing, you get assistance. It doesn't stipulate that if you're a millionaire and you're paying $300,000 a year for income, $330,000 a year for income, that you don't get assistance or whatever. And then also doesn't recognize, which is a budget and a tax guy, I know, the wealthier you are, the more you can be creative as to what is income. And so you can have less income, and Warren Buffett talks about this a lot, than even his secretary. And then I also think that you need to deal with we need to target this assistance so that it is actually helping people. And then also we want to see affordability that actually helps people reduce their premium by reducing risk, that we're actually moving people out of harm's way rather than subsidizing them to stay in harm's way.
Then, as someone mentioned earlier, about repeatedly paying for someone's losses when they continue to be in a risk area. Is there any element of that in the bill where you have a 1, 2, 3 strike you're out, or anything like that?
It's really funny that you say that, Bill, and the fact that sadly I've been working this long enough that in 2004 there was a bill. It was called 3 Strikes and You're Out of the Taxpayer's Pocket Act. That was Mr. B. Ryder from Nebraska, Republican, and Mr. Blumenauer from Oregon, a Democrat. That really didn't quite get there, and then in the 2012 bill, they reduced it said that severe repetitive loss properties had to pay actuarial premiums eventually, or move towards that. I think that that's something that makes a lot of sense. It's something that is challenging to make it happen politically. It's something that we certainly support. But the thing is that as Americans, we're really big-hearted people, and we kind of are soft-headed past disaster and don't demand what we should, and a lot of our elected officials get in the way of that, to be totally frank. I mean, and it's something that all the 3 floods and you're out of the Taxpayer's Pocket Act, all it said was you just have to pay risk-based rates. You just don't get any subsidies anymore. And the argument was, well, that's unfair because they built before they knew what the risk was. And so it's something that we're pushing for and we think is reasonable. And, at some point you have to think about what is fair to the vast majority of American taxpayers rather than this small minority of people who are benefiting from a house that was built 30 years ago that may have turned over several times.
So, Steve and Josh, I know you guys have to go soon, so tell me if you need to leave.
Oh, we'll talk for as long as you want.
Okay, good. All right.
No problem.
Well, only Brian can hold us in tonight then, so that's really good. So, you were going to say something, Josh. I don't want to interrupt you.
Well, I think I've lost my train of thought. Let's go.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
What I wanted to ask, I guess, I've heard critics say that the current bills could undermine or destabilize the flood program. How would you respond to that?
It's interesting, and a colleague of ours from another organization, our Street Institute, what the argument is that private flood is going to cherry pick from the program. And as my colleague pointed out, there are no cherries to pick. This program is a definition of adverse selection. The only people who are buying flood insurance are the people who are the most likely to use it. And so what we have found is that, one, in Florida, where almost 40% of the NFIP policies are in Florida, as the private flood market has developed, they are writing insurance across the risk spectrum. So they are writing in the highest riskiest zones, they're writing in the medium and the lower risky zones. So they are taking on all this risk. And secondly, the Reinsurance Association of America did an analysis of the state-run wind program in Florida, Citizens, that had highly subsidized premiums after Wilma in 2005. And they essentially invited the private sector to come in and even look at their book of policies and take stuff out of the program. So you had a program that had initially just couple thousand policies that ballooned to 1.5 million policies. The private sector took more than 1 million policies out of that program, so it's less than 500,000. And when you look at the analysis, they took it from all risk profiles. They took it all along the coast, which wind is really very well correlated with flood, and because that's where you can make your money. That's where there's that delta between the premium and the risk that is actually good, and that they can lay it off in the private sector. So we don't think that private flood insurance is actually going to cannibalize flood insurance, or only leave it with just bad policies. We hope that actually, as you normalize the private flood insurance marketplace, that more people, there's a company in Wisconsin that writes homeowners insurance, and they're going to say, and literally there is a company in Wisconsin that writes homeowners insurance that has a rider for flood, that you can just say, yeah, I'll take the flood insurance policy along with it. And so it gets to what Josh is talking about when Flo actually talks about, get your, not just your motorcycle and your car and your home, but get your flood with Progressive.
Short answer is this program isn't stable to begin with.
Right.
There you go. There's the short answer. So there are also, you know, some concerns out there that this could stall the real estate markets. So how would y'all respond to that?
Well, I have to say, that's the first time Josh has had the short answer. But secondly, no, I mean, the realtors actually, we've been at loggerheads with the realtors in the past, but we're not 100% together, but we're actually pretty much together, because what the realtors have said is that they're trying to develop a relationship with their client, because people who buy a home, buy another home, buy another home, you know, not normally a third home, but like they continue to buy homes, and they want to have a really relationship. So they don't want to sell people into risky properties, as long as everything is transmitted up front and that it's all together. And so I think that it's all about people are communicated this risk, and that it is something where the federal government is being responsive to that risk. Josh?
I think that's pretty much it.
You're making me a liar, Josh, with your short response.
All right, James, unless Kim, you have a final comment or anything, or Brian or Kevin has another question. Kim's
complicated issue, that's for sure.
It really is, but I think we've explored some good things tonight. So I really appreciate you guys being on with us.
Yeah, this sounds more frustrating than forecasting the weather.
Guys, I think bottom line is this is a program that needs a lot of help, and Congress needs some support and some pushing. And, you know, we'd love all your listeners to help and call their members of Congress and let them know that this is something that needs to get done and needs to get done right.
And so if anybody wants to get in touch with you guys, what's the best way to do that?
How do you usually do it? Phones, emails, through nwf.org is our website. We're happy to talk however people want to get in touch with us.
And for me, I'm Steve, S-T-E-V-E, at taxpayer.net, and we're at www.taxpayer.net. And then I would say what I would ask of you and your brethren is, and I'm sure you do, is implore more people to get flood insurance. I mean, I think that to me, what is still staggering is that the people who had flood insurance in Baton Rouge got $86,500, and the people who didn't got $9,000. And as someone whose parents put up my mom's best friend for several months after her house was flooded, I think it's really important for people to have flood insurance. There are a lot more people who need it than recognize. And so we would like to see a lot more people have flood insurance, because I think it would reduce the national disaster costs, but just from a personal note, I know the impacts on individuals from being affected by a flood.
Yeah, I've been doing this a long time, and it's heartbreaking. It is just devastating. Whether it's a flash flood, a river flood, it's just unbelievable. It's a very important subject and a great discussion. So, thanks, fellas. Y'all stayed up a long time. You guys have been here for an hour and 15 minutes. You gave us more than an hour. So, thank y'all so much for staying up late tonight. We appreciate y'all being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, guys. All right, so let's see here. We need to let Kevin tell his story real quick. Kevin,
the fight with Twitter.
Yes.
Well, yeah, do the recorded things, and I'll have it set up by then.
Well, we don't. The problem, we don't have any recorded things tonight. Brian and Tony do not have a recorded segment, and Aubrey, I was going to see if she wanted to do email, but I don't know if she's on the line with us right now. So we could do.
No, I can do it.
Roundup. Okay, go. I can't wait. This is exciting.
It's nothing earth shattering. It's a tiny little thing, but I think it's one of these things. You know, I have been saying lately that standards sort of, erode a little bit at a time instead of going out in a blaze of glory, or things sort of creep in. But yesterday morning when I popped onto Twitter, you see a tweet, right? And then the next thing is like a promoted tweet, right? Because then that's where they run their ads. Well, they were running an ad for themselves, basically. It was a promoted tweet. I got to find the thing now. Hang on. It struck me just as a little bit odd, because here it is. It was a promoted tweet from Twitter, and the body of it was, raise your hand if you're hiding from the heat wave. And this was a lead in to their new little promotional campaign that they're doing. And they've got 3 little commercials. They're using the hashtag #SeeEverySide. And in addition to that, the tweet says Summergeddon is happening. And they've obviously, co-opted the Snowmageddon thing. Didn't Jason Samenow coin that, or did he just use it?
I don't know who started that.
I think it was Jason. I think he did it on the Capitol Weather Gang. I sent him a note and he didn't respond. But anyway, so again, it's a new way to promote Twitter, yada yada yada. But this one commercial is kind of centered around the heat. But it struck me as odd because usually at the bottom of those, you'll see that it's promoted, right, to indicate that it's a commercial. But this one said promoted because you're in Wichita Falls, U.S. And that was the first time I'd seen something targeted to a specific area. And it struck me kind of odd. Okay, so Twitter's thinking, okay, somebody somewhere is under a heat wave. Do they just assume that Wichita Falls that this part of the country is? Because actually we are not. The last several days, we've been below seasonal averages on temperatures. And so we're not under a heat wave. And so I started watching the spot, and I saw somebody mentioned that I know. I'm not going to get into all the details of it, but what I started to look at and that bothered me was, in the era of fake news, a lot of the little tweets that they were promoting in this, they kind of were building a little story about a thing going viral, and it has to do with the heat and yada yada yada. But I got kind of bugged because all the accounts were fake. They were accounts that were made up to sort of help tell the story, and so that kind of bothered me. And then the fact that they had targeted me and were giving the suggestion that we were under some sort of a heat wave bothered me, because we weren't. And this is where I get into this creep question, because what happens in the wintertime, or what happens during a severe weather event? Are they, my question was, are they sort of drifting into weather information like Facebook is doing? Because part of this little commercial, there was a tweet from the Weather Channel with a heat advisory. Well, again, I know it's a commercial, but it just kind of represented this creep to me. And so I contacted Twitter PR, and the first response was sort of this generic, well, these are our new campaigns, blah, 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 blah. And I kind of pushed back a little more earlier today, and then I never heard back from them. But it just, I'm going to follow up on it. I'll write about it on the blog when I get some more information. But it just kind of bothered me to see them kind of giving the impression that there was, and maybe they're not, but giving the impression that there was some sort of weather event in my area that was targeted to me, and it even said so, that really wasn't happening. And it just concerns me that these social media platforms are drifting further and further into weather information, which is someplace that they don't have any experience in or knowledge of, and that concerns me. Does any of that make sense? I didn't explain it very
No, it does. And these guys are in San Francisco. They don't know anything about heat waves or tornadoes or floods. And they see if it's 91 degrees, then that's a heat emergency or something. And where the truth is, that's a routine day and below average. And I agree. Now, so you must access Twitter via the web interface. Is that how you access Twitter?
No, this was on my phone, on the Twitter app on my phone.
Okay, because I don't use the Twitter app, and I don't use their web interface. I use Tweetbot, and so I don't see any of these things. And that's probably why they're trying to get rid of these third-party apps like that, because you don't see their promoted tweets. But I see none of that the way I access it.
Yeah. No, usually the second one, when you log on after a period of time, the second one is an ad, and then you scroll down and you get 10 or 20 tweets or whatever it is, and then you get another ad. And that's how it works on their app. But once again, I don't know. I get what happened. In fact, I know what happened, because and maybe like I said, I'll write about this. But what happened is the PR department and the marketing people got together and said, hey, we're going to do this marketing thing, and some of it's going to be heat, and there's a sports one, and there's a music one, and so on and so forth. And so there wasn't really this evil plot to use weather information. But at first, I thought maybe there was, because one of my early questions was, well, wait a minute, is this coming from the Weather Channel? Is there some partnership in there? And that was one of my questions. And they said, no, we just talked to the Weather Channel because we wanted to use, their name and a logo in this little commercial. But again, it just is this little chipping away, because I'm seeing more and more weather information coming from the Weather Channel on Facebook. And as you guys know, that just has kind of bothered me for a long time. But it just represents a little, what's the term? Creep. There's some sort of creep term. I can't think of it. Doesn't matter. I don't know. It was a poor explanation. I will write about it. I will be watching it, and I'll be tenacious. Like I'm still waiting for Al Gore to respond on the Inconvenient Truth backwards hurricane poster.
So how did you contact these guys? Did you send them an email or a tweet, or how did you get in touch with them?
Yeah, usually with any company, there at some level there's a media contact, and so I'm part of the media. So hey, I work at a television station. Here are my questions, and they respond with a generic answer, and then you got to push back a little further. But this one, again, it got weird because the first tweet in this little commercial, and maybe I'll make that my pick of the week, the commercial, so you guys can look at it. The first tweet is from the Weather Channel, and it's saying heat advisory, right? And then there's these bunch of fake accounts that are helping to tell the story. And then they used a real account, the name of an actual broadcast meteorologist who I know. And then I thought, okay, well, these are real things. And that's where it bothered me that there were fake things in there as well, because now you're dancing on this fake news line, right? Were they telling a little story? Yes, it was a commercial. It was a little play, I suppose. And again, it just kind of got a little close to the fake news line.
Okay. Well, keep us posted. I would love to have a full-blown war with Kevin and Twitter. That would be awesome.
Yeah. I don't
great for the ratings here.
Yeah. This was the person I've been corresponding with is a low-level PR person. And I think the second response even said, here's the responses to your extended questions. This is not official. This is just me telling you, what I'm telling you. And I was like, okay, but I'd really like to know a little more. And she hadn't responded after that. So.
Okay, well, keep us posted. Hey, Kim, real quick, did you go to the AMS meeting in Kansas City last week, by any chance?
I did. I was there for at least one of the days, but I was there.
So give us a very brief synopsis. What were the highlights? Because all of us had to miss.
Oh, yeah, you did. It was really a shame that you couldn't go, especially because there had been a planned meeting to try to iron out some rules on consistency that I was very bummed to miss, and I know very many people were bummed to miss it, but it's a conversation we need to have, and we'll move it forward. So while we didn't have that conversation, there were a lot of conversations about the watch warning advisory system and the ways that the Weather Service has been thinking about possibly modifying that. There was a whole session dedicated to it. There were some sessions dedicated to the impact-based warning program and evaluating its effectiveness. There were a number of talks about new research underway to try to change future warning paradigms like the Facets program, and I know that some of my colleagues from the test bed here talked a little bit about some of the work they've tried to do in new warning ideas, new forecast watch warning system ideas, and perhaps moving to probabilistic warnings. So those were the sessions that I saw. I know that there were a couple of parallel sessions, but those were the things that I was really tuned into. And one of the things that was really striking, especially from the broadcasters in the audience, was the feedback that they gave to the program leads from the Weather Service was really, there's a lot of anxiety, I think, about the potential changes coming with HAZSAMP, the kinds of things that might, now that I think some changes are actually planned, people are starting to realize this is real, and this is going to affect what we do, and we're going to be the intermediaries who have to communicate this, and we need to know what's going on. And the Weather Service heard that message very loud, very clear, that change is not easy, and not everybody is very excited to necessarily have it. There are a lot of folks who really would like change of some form, but what exactly that is, not very many people have solid ideas to say. So from my perspective, that's most of what was discussed, and I think we have a couple of really interesting years ahead as some of the HAZSAMP program work wraps up, and we start to see some of the recommendations come forward, and there will be a whole community effort, I think, to make those decisions, because it's all of us.
I can see a time where we're going to move from talking about all this, hazmat, has simplification, all this, to actually doing something. And that's to me the exciting part. And I sense that time is getting close.
What's your opinion? What have you wanted to see?
Well, look, I've talked enough about this stuff. I am very interested in facets. If you've seen this, I mean, it's fantastic. I don't know if everybody else on the show has seen what they're doing with this.
Oh, yeah.
It's basically warnings that evolve continuously to match the threat. And I think this is just great stuff. But I do think, and I've shown the periodic table. You've seen that, Kim, the watch warning advisory periodic table with all the Weather Service watches and warnings and advisories and the colors. I don't even know what half that stuff is. And I'm in this business. And I think, we've got to move toward a simple, unified message. It's got to be something easy to understand. I've said this before. We sit around these meetings, these pointy-headed conferences, and we decide what we think is best. And the truth is, we need to go in the Dollar Generals and the Walmarts where real people are that we serve and talk with them. And that's what you've been doing on the social side of it to help us. And I think we all understand the direction where we need to go. And we're just at the point where at some point you got to stop talking. I'm talked out. I don't even want to do any more conferences where I talk anymore. I want to go to a gathering where we can agree to do something and move forward. And not just do it randomly, do it in a way that makes sense for our end users, because we have had loss of life over the years because of confusion and complicated messages and messaging problems and our lack of understanding of human behavior and social science. And I just think the time has come. So I'm most excited about doing something in terms of simplifying all these watches and warnings, doing something about the colors. And, you pick your fights. I don't even know if I want to pick that fight right now. The colors, we could go on for years about that. But
let me ask Kim then, because she kind of sat and listened during the Tuesday meeting.
And by the way, guys, I got to do the 10 o'clock. So y'all carry on here. We can do this all night, but I got to run. Thanks, Kim and everybody. We'll see y'all next week. I got to run. So
great to see you,
have a good vacation.
Okay.
Kim, what were your thoughts about the conversation with regard to moving toward what we were referring to as the river of weather?
Oh man, this is one of my personal peeves, because I think that the conversation always gets oversimplified. Color, while yes, there are some colors that indicate risk to people more naturally, like red, you just can't make everything red. We have a red flag warning, we have red tornado boxes and, watch boxes and warnings. And, it really is about what the underlying attributes are and ways of making it so that they all make sense as a collection. And that's what the struggle really is. And I think the conversation you guys were having as broadcasters up there, when you were talking about how unified color schemes really aren't going to be possible, I don't think that's necessarily bad. And one of the points that I know Gina couldn't see me, I was sort of behind her raising my hand, but I wanted to give you guys props and sort of suggest that what might be happening is that your viewers get the gist. No matter if you use different color schemes, different categorical rating scales, they might get the gist of just knowing, hey, there might be severe weather.
Right.
And that's enough to maybe
Right.
do the things that they need to do.
Right.
We don't have evidence that those inconsistencies drive anyone to not take protective action. No one has a study that's shown that. No one. And so
you
I
think
know
it's
that
just-
go ahead.
Yeah, you think it's just increasing awareness? It's a good thing either way.
I think increasing awareness can be really good, but we might be so focused on trying to describe the contours of the risk and the little different gradations of the hazard that we miss talking about things like safety and what it is that people can be doing about the risk. And this was an argument that was made at the Broadcasters Conference when they were talking about IBW. They found that increasing the impact messaging increasingly lends some people to the desire to flee. And we know that especially in urban areas, that can be terrible. I mean, that's the El Reno Day in Oklahoma City. That was our huge lesson. And we did not see that coming, even though the trends had been there. And we had been doing nothing to message about that, and we still aren't. That is a problem that remains, and it really is about trying to understand, why are people leaving well-built homes? And it's probably because they don't know that they can survive. And it's probably because we have them so scared. When we talk about tornadoes before and during the events, especially in the Oklahoma City market, they're so sensitized to threat and risk that they just want to take their lives into their hands and have some sense of control. We don't know. I'm conjecturing, but we have got to do that research and try to think about not just messaging the contours of threats, but also of safety.
Yeah, I wanted to tell you the story the other day, and I didn't get a chance to, and tell a couple of other people as well. But there was an incident here some weeks ago where, and I'm going to try not to mention names and whatnot, but there was a family. It was parents and an adult daughter driving actually from Birmingham here toward Wichita Falls, and they ended up in Dallas with some thunderstorms. It was, I guess, early evening, and they were in Denton. Didn't know where they were. They've never come to Dallas before, but they're driving along, and they had made a pit stop. They were in communication with 2 television meteorologists who were telling them what was going on with regard to the thunderstorms. And while they were stopped, I guess it was for gas, they actually came under a tornado warning. They were at the far, far edge of the polygon, okay? And saying, well, what's going on? What are we supposed to do? And the 2 television meteorologists advised them, okay, look, you're under a tornado warning. You need to go into a sturdy structure, get away from the gas station, and don't sit in your car, and so on and so forth. And as they were getting that information, they started to hear the sirens go off. But they had gone into a local mall. This was right near where they were. They heard the sirens go off, and then there was some communication breakdown, but they knew they were under the warning. They heard the sirens, and they made the decision at that point to get in their car and drive away. And I haven't had the chance to discuss it with them, but I thought long and hard about this afterwards. And I think what happened was they realized, number one, they were in a place that they didn't know. They didn't know what was going on, but they felt under threat because of the warnings. And so what's the natural response? This is a bad place to be. I need to get out of here. And so they drove off, and they actually drove further into the polygon toward the path of those storms. They weren't under direct threat, but they didn't know. And I'm fascinated by that. I'm scared by it as well.
Mm-hmm. That is so interesting. My sense, it's hard to tell from the data that we have if there's really a trend, but there have been marked events recently where people they're dying in their cars, or they're dying in low-lying ditches or something. They leave buildings, and they die in floodwaters, and messaging multi-hazard events is difficult. And we really.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Kim. I'm going to have to go, but because we're starting our show, I'm in the studio here. But thank you for coming. I want to listen to the rest of your stuff after I leave. But thanks.
Good to talk with you.
So Kim, you mentioned IBW, and I know Gina's done a lot of research in that regard. You know, what are some of the results on some of that research right now on that messaging? Is it good, indifferent, bad? Could be improved?
Yeah, Gina found a couple of really interesting things that both on the forecaster side and the end user side. She found that forecasters are challenged to make these estimates in the amount of time when they're useful, because it takes a lot of, they'll sort of issue the first warning, and then they'll do this IBW tagging in the SVS that follows up. They have discovered a number of reasons why forecasters are quite hesitant to put these tags on, including the fact that tornadoes are quite ephemeral. So by the time you see that signal, it might not last very long. And there are a lot of forecasters that are concerned about having a new kind of false alarm. Evaluations have been done of how the forecasts work out. Are forecasters able to do this? And one recent study that looked at this showed that actually what's surprising is that the probability of detection is quite low. So when there are very bad tornadoes, maybe about 60% of them actually get any sort of damage tag. So forecasters are really hesitant to throw down, but it's not just that they're hesitant, it's also sometimes that they can't tell before it's already done. And so there's a concern, and the broadcasters and emergency managers that were interviewed, they really like knowing when the hazard is confirmed. They like having that information up front. They like the format of this information. They like having some of the gist of what the forecasters think might happen, but they are really hesitant to pass those messages along. So it's probably not getting out to the public too much yet. They're probably not really seeing this messaging. And in some sense, that might be okay in that they might be more inclined to do things that aren't helpful with some of those messages. And I think that the Weather Service has started to change their messaging about it. They said that it used to be about the public, and now they're saying it's about their core partners. If it really is about their core partners, emergency managers love all the information you can give them. So, I think there's still some healthy debate about the program, and her work has started some really interesting conversations within Weather Service about what they might consider moving forward as the goal of the program, if it really is public side messaging or really just an internal piece, what they want to put their focus in. And that might be more appropriate given what she's finding.
One of you needs to identify IBW so the listeners know what you're talking about.
Thank you, acronym minder Brian Peters. Yes, impact-based warnings, right, Ken?
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yes, impact-based warnings.
All those little tags. And it was funny, when Gina came to Birmingham, very few people even knew about it that were in the room. And some of the emergency managers were the most knowledgeable. And one of the guys who ran, the biggest hospital in town, said, they really use that information actively. And so I thought that was interesting. We had problems here last week because there were lots of people in downtown Birmingham. The siren sounded in downtown Birmingham, which technically was not in the polygon for the tornado. And lots of people were, shuttled into shelters and, restaurants and things, offices downtown and things. And the threat was passing to the north of them. We still don't, after 10 years, we're still not even using the polygons right.
Well, in Jefferson County there, do you guys, because that's where Birmingham is, right? Jefferson County?
Yes.
That's a large county. Do you guys have sectorized sirens?
Brian, you may can answer that. I couldn't.
I don't think
so.
Do yet? No.
I
don't think they do.
I think they may in Shelby County, which is
yes, they do in Shelby County
to the south, but not in the county.
There are a number of counties in Alabama that do, but I don't believe Jefferson is one of them.
And those people were not upset, because it really wasn't, a bad alarm for them. They went through the process. At least the anecdotal people I talked to, because they could physically see the tornado, it was 5 or 6 miles away. They weren't unhappy about being in a tornado, not being in a tornado warning, but thinking they were.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's good.
Well, Kim, it's so awesome to have you on the show tonight. Thank you for joining us on short notice. We gave you a little bit of heads up about pick of the week. So do you have a pick of the week for us?
Oh, yes, I do. My pick of the week is the official teaser for the movie Geostorm. If you have been dying for a movie about what might happen if we try to do weather modification on a global scale, and you want to see all the disasters, both meteorological and geologic, that could apparently cause, this is the movie for you. And it's coming out, I think, August. I'm going to be bringing a whole troop of people from the lab here, I'm sure, to go see this delight. So it looks really, really good, and I'll be putting that link out on our pick of the week.
So is this our next Sharknado movie?
Maybe. We'll see if it reaches that cult classic status. I mean, it's pretty tough to compete with Sharknado. This shows promise. I mean, their tornadoes on fire. You know, their tornadoes multiple at the same time. There's a whole national, space grid of like bombs being shot into a hurricane. Like this might do it, but we'll have to see. Time will tell.
Well, but we have to wait till October.
October. Oh,
I can't wait that long, Brian Peter.
That's what the beginning of the trailer on YouTube says. October, released in October.
So I'm going to throw away my pick of the week on cloud seeding after you just nuked it right there. Kim, sorry.
Right off the top, the trailer is interesting. It's got like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 7 tornadoes coming down the street.
Oh, sounds like a storm chaser's dream.
Absolutely.
Brian Peters, what's your pick of the week?
I always like to go back to the Boston Globe from time to time, and they did a nice photographic piece of weather back in May, and of just weather that was going on, I think that week. And it's got a lot of very interesting photographs of various weather all around the world. So that's going to be my pick.
Outstanding. And so my pick of the week will be Dr. Marshall Shepard's article in Forbes about hurricanes and gamma rays, after having just watched the National Geographic series Genius on Albert Einstein. I thought that would be a fun one. So Kim, any last thoughts to add on our talk tonight? Because I thought this was an interesting and timely program, and I thought our guests were very good, and I thought your input was tremendous. So anything you could add that we should have talked about that we didn't get to, or that you'd like to throw in as a final comment?
Well, thank you. I mean, the only thing I was thinking is it would have been really nice if we could have had the guests talk about what our listeners can do. If there are things that they can be thinking about for themselves and for their communities in trying to advocate for community-based change. It really does come down to all of us. And so often we look to the federal government to solve this issue. But it really is about us, and we need to get empowered and get our neighbors empowered. And if there's anything that I wish I would have prompted them on, it's that, but I'll just seed that in the minds of our listeners that there are things you can do. And I would look to, there are community-based organizations in many places where people are trying to think about how to work this out in their communities. So especially if you're in a place that is particularly flood prone, please do seek those out and get involved.
So Kim, you've worked very closely in policy and continue to, but have actually been in offices where, constituents contact, their representatives. So what, give us some tips to pass along to our people of how they can, have their voices heard beyond that directly with their representatives. Sure.
Well, the best thing to do is, of course, to find coalitions of people who have big letter campaigns. I was really heartened to see that in my office, every letter that was sent was read, and they were all responded to, and it really mattered. We had a weekly meeting internally that, the mail was discussed and what our constituents were wanting was discussed, and I know that's true for so many. So if you feel, I know there's a lot of, there's sort of a sour mood right now about Congress in general, but do know that for the most part, the folks who are there are very dedicated, and they want to know about what the people in their local area need, even if everything seems like it's all bound up in this big national politics, political conversation. There's a lot that still happens that's local, relevant to local areas, and they are listening. So do send those letters, make those calls, and especially if you can find advocacy groups that have the same opinion you have, if you can write in as a part of their campaign, just to sort of have an amplifier next to your voice, or if there's anything you can do in your local community to spread that, seek those things out.
Well, we've really enjoyed having you tonight, Kim. Thank you again for joining us. It's been super seeing you again, talking to you.
Yeah, it was great to be here, and good to see all of you too. I hope you all have a wonderful night.
Well, Brian turns into a pumpkin just after 10 o'clock, so we're probably pushing our luck now. So I'll go
Happy
ahead.
4th of July.
That's right. Happy Independence Day, everybody. Hope everybody has a nice 4th, lots of fireworks and barbecue, and I'm going to warm up my new smoker and try to smoke some brisket on Monday. We'll see how that goes. So But anyway, this is WeatherBrains, the weekly netcast that's all about weather. We do it usually on Monday nights. Sometimes because of vacations, we move things around. But next week, we'll be joined not by Dr. Patrick Marsh on the 10th of July, like we thought. We're going to try to switch him with Greg Stump. You'll hear from Dr. Marsh on the 17th. Mike Collier from Weather Battle on the 24th. And then we're going to be talking about Oklahoma City on the 31st. Damon Lane and some other folks are going to join us on that show. That'll be fun. And then we'll come back with Dr. Judith Curry on August 7th, Leah Daly on the 14th, and Craig Fugate, the famous former director of FEMA, will join us on Monday, August 21st. And so looking forward to the next set of guests. Kim, we hope you'll come back and join us really soon. You have a standing invitation. Maybe we'll make that happen next week.
That sounds wonderful. And man, what a lineup of guests. Would love to be here for any and all of those.
Those will all be fun. But for all the panelists that are usually here, for James and for Kevin, for Brian, of course, and for Aubrey and Nate, who is doing a parent-teacher conference tonight somewhere in North Carolina, I'm Bill Murray saying I hope you have a happy 4th of July, and we'll see you on July 10th. Thanks for joining us.
Good night. Thanks, Kim.
Yeah, have a good night, guys. Thank you so much.
Bye, Kim. Thanks for staying up.
Happy 4th.
See y'all.
First week didn't work. It didn't take. See if they're still on the air here. No, they are not. And look at that. 7 people are still watching. Wow. So this is that magical simulcast here with Song of the Night and WeatherBrains. So WeatherBrains, thank you guys for watching the Thursday night special. Great show tonight. The podcast version will be up Monday night, July 3rd. So we'll see you guys soon. Thank you all for watching. Have a great week and God bless.